My name is Linda Wells, and at 25, I learned the cruelest lesson life could teach me. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most will turn away the moment you need them. I was 23 when I poured everything I had into my tech startup, a bold, audacious dream of changing the world. I spent countless nights coding while the city outside my tiny apartment hummed with life I barely noticed. Investors, pitches, late-night calls, and the ever-present hum of my laptop. It was all-consuming, and I loved every second of it. For a while, it felt like the world was finally noticing me. My app had started to gain traction, and I could see the possibilities. The thrill of creation, the intoxicating hope that my vision could actually become reality, kept me awake for nights on end. I believed in what I was building, in myself, and most importantly, in the support of the people I called family. But dreams have a way of turning into nightmares when life decides to teach you lessons the hard way. By 25, it all came crashing down. A competitor undercut us, investors suddenly disappeared, and my carefully constructed world collapsed in the blink of an eye. The startup that had once seemed unstoppable now lay in ruins. My bank account was empty, my debts were piling up, and my heart felt heavier than ever before. I owed $80,000 in loans and credit card bills, and I had a lease I couldn't pay. The fear was suffocating, each day a new reminder that I had failed. Not just myself, but also the people I had hoped would be there when things got hard. So, I did what any desperate daughter would do. I reached out to my parents. My father, Raymond Cox, was a small-time real estate agent who spent most of his life chasing deals that never materialized. He prided himself on ambition, but rarely achieved results. My mother, Dorothy Cox, spent her days curating a flawless image of herself in designer clothes, attending charity events, and maintaining the illusion of a perfect life. To them, I had always been a trophy, a reflection of their status, as long as I followed their carefully constructed rules. I arrived at their home in Irvine one evening, my heart pounding, trying to ignore the stack of unpaid bills pressing against my chest like a physical weight. I explained everything, the bankruptcy, the debts, the crushing pressure. I begged for a lifeline, just enough to get back on my feet. I wasn't asking for a handout, only a chance to recover. "You're a liability now, Linda," my father said, his voice colder than I had ever heard it. "We can't afford to bail you out." I stared at him, disbelief twisting in my chest. "But Dad, I've worked so hard. I just need a little help. You taught me to aim high. This isn't my fault." My mother didn't even look up from her wine glass. Her words, sharp and precise, cut deeper than any financial burden could. "You should have been more careful," she said, her tone dripping with indifference. I felt my throat tighten, the weight of betrayal settling on my shoulders like an anchor. I pleaded, I argued, I tried to make them see the person I was, not the failure they now saw. But it was no use. My calls went unanswered, my texts ignored, and one day I discovered I had been blocked from my mother's social media accounts, as if erasing me digitally could undo the shame I supposedly brought to her life. I was alone, absolutely, crushingly alone. My apartment became a refuge for the broken pieces of my life. It was a one-bedroom rental, cheap and peeling at the corners, with noisy neighbors and creaking floors. The bills piled up faster than I could manage, each unopened envelope a reminder of my failure. Collection agencies called daily, their voices sharp and relentless, each message a hammer to my fragile resolve. I sold my laptop, my furniture, anything that could bring a few extra dollars. I lived on instant noodles and cheap diner meals, my dreams seemingly dissolving with each passing day. One night, I sat on the cold linoleum floor, staring at an eviction notice that gave me 30 days to pay or leave. My chest ached, my hands shook, and the world felt impossibly heavy. I felt hollow, erased, as though I had never existed at all. Friends I had celebrated with during my startup's high days vanished, their presence replaced by silence. It was as if my failure was contagious, and everyone I had once known had moved away from me. The only constant in my life was Angela Price, my best friend and unwavering supporter. We had met during the early days of my startup, bonding over late-night coding sessions, shared dreams, and the intoxicating hope that we could build something that mattered. Angela didn't shy away from my pain. She called, texted, and even visited me with coffee when I could barely afford the bus fare. "You're stronger than this," she said one afternoon, her voice firm yet comforting. "Don't let them define you, Linda. You've got this." Her words lit a spark in me, a refusal to give up even when the world seemed to conspire against me. I began to find strength in small victories, repaying a bill, fixing my budget, even just surviving the day without breaking down completely. Each moment, no matter how small, became a building block for the life I was determined to reclaim. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying my parents' rejection. The betrayal cut deep, but it also fueled something in me I hadn't felt before: anger, determination, and a stubborn refusal to be erased. I learned that day that people can turn their backs on you, but the fire within cannot be extinguished unless you allow it. It was during one of those late-night reflections that I realized something important. I didn't need their approval to define my worth. I didn't need their validation to pursue my dreams. All I needed was belief. In myself, in the people who truly cared, and in the unwavering knowledge that I could rise, no matter how many times I fell. That night, sitting in my small apartment surrounded by bills, eviction notices, and the echoes of betrayal, I made a silent promise to myself. I would survive. I would rebuild. And one day, I would confront the people who tried to erase me, and I would prove to them that blood alone doesn't define family. Because family, I realized, is what you do, not who you are born to. And so began my journey, not just to recover financially, but to reclaim my life, my dignity, and ultimately, my power. This was the fall. But little did I know, it was also the beginning of everything that would follow: pain, heartbreak, unexpected kindness, and ultimately, justice. Just when I thought my world had no more room to fall, when the darkness seemed endless, and the weight of debt and betrayal pressed down like an immovable mountain, a glimmer of hope appeared in the form of someone I hadn't realized would be my lifeline: my uncle, Jonathan Wells. Uncle Jonathan wasn't part of the carefully curated, image-obsessed family my parents so proudly displayed. He lived quietly, modestly, but with a kindness and integrity that shone brighter than anything I had ever known. While my parents chased social status and perfection, he lived with authenticity and, importantly, with heart. He had always been the one family member who treated me as a person, not a trophy or a liability. When I finally broke down one evening on the phone with him, I didn't hold back. Between sobs and shaky breaths, I told him everything: the bankruptcy, the eviction notice, the mountain of debt, the cold indifference of my parents. I expected disappointment, a lecture, or even silence. What I didn't expect was his unwavering calm, his voice steady and warm. "Linda," he said softly, "you've built something incredible already, even if it didn't work out. You're smart, determined, and resourceful. That matters more than you know. I'll help you. You're not alone." Those words were like oxygen after drowning. I felt tears stream down my face, not of shame or grief, but of relief. Someone finally saw me, really saw me, and believed in me. True to his word, Uncle Jonathan offered me a financial lifeline, not a handout, but a bridge to rebuild. He didn't just write a check and disappear. He sat with me, mapping out how I could regain stability. We went through every detail: debts, assets, expenses, and even my mental state. He made me feel like my dreams were still worth pursuing, that failure was not the end, but a step on the path forward. With his guidance, I moved into a slightly better apartment, a tiny upgrade that gave me space to breathe. I began selling old tech equipment I no longer needed, negotiating payment plans for my debts, and slowly regaining control over my life. Every small victory, paying off a collection account, reducing a credit card balance, or simply making rent on time, felt monumental. For the first time in months, I could feel a sense of hope creeping back into my life. I also started thinking about the future again. I began coding late nights, creating new app concepts, and pitching ideas to investors, all under the careful mentorship of my uncle. He didn't just provide money, he provided wisdom. He taught me to focus on fundamentals, to understand that real success isn't just about luck or funding, it's about resilience, strategy, and preparation. Meanwhile, my parents remained silent, their absence a constant reminder of the betrayal I had endured. I didn't reach out to them, nor did I feel any need to explain my progress. For the first time, I realized that their opinions, their approval, and even their recognition were irrelevant. What mattered was the belief of the people who truly cared, and Uncle Jonathan's faith in me became the fuel that powered my recovery. Angela, of course, continued to be a constant. She helped me late at night when deadlines loomed, proofread pitches, and kept me grounded when my own doubts threatened to overwhelm me. One evening, as we sat on the floor of my modest apartment surrounded by empty coffee cups and piles of papers, I admitted my fears. Sometimes I feel like I'm just one failure away from falling apart again, I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. Angela reached over, holding my hand tightly. Linda, every time you fall, you get up stronger. That's how survivors are made. Look at how far you've come already. You're not the girl they tried to erase. You're stronger, smarter, and more unstoppable than ever. Her words were a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't fighting alone. But the real change came with Uncle Jonathan. He introduced me to investors who believed in my vision, helped me strategize new business approaches, and even connected me with mentors who had survived failure themselves. Slowly, methodically, I rebuilt my financial stability. I also learned lessons I would never forget. Trust had to be earned, and family, real family, was defined by action, not blood. My parents had abandoned me when I needed them most, but my uncle, a man I barely saw growing up, had stepped into that void. That contrast, sharp and painful, taught me a truth I would carry forever. Love and loyalty are demonstrated through support, sacrifice, and unwavering belief, not titles or lineage. Months turned into years, and with Uncle Jonathan's help, I finally began to feel like myself again. My debts were manageable, my career was growing, and the dreams I had once thought were lost began to take shape once more. I learned to celebrate small victories: the first fully paid credit card, the first investor meeting that went well, the first night sleeping without the fear of eviction looming over me. Yet even amid recovery, a part of me could not forget the sting of betrayal. My parents remained absent in my thoughts, a painful reminder of what true support and unconditional love should look like, and how they had failed me. The memory of their cold words and dismissive actions became fuel, igniting a determination within me that I would not be defined by their judgment or indifference. Then came the day that would change everything again. The day my uncle passed away unexpectedly. The news hit me like a tidal wave. I felt hollow, as if a part of me had been ripped away. He had been my rock, my guide, my proof that kindness and integrity still existed in the world. I couldn't imagine navigating life without him. But even in grief, there was a glimmer of hope. A week after his passing, a lawyer's letter arrived. Uncle Jonathan had left instructions, a secret plan ensuring that everything he had built and accumulated over the years would protect me, and exclude those who had never truly cared for me. The conditions were clear, precise, and unassailable. I sat on the edge of my bed, reading and rereading the document, a mix of relief and disbelief flooding me. My parents would never see it coming. After years of turning their backs on me, after pretending I had no worth, they had no claim, no control, and no power. For the first time in my life, justice felt real. I knew, deep down, that the battles were far from over, but I also knew that I had been given the tools to face them, not as a helpless victim, but as a strong, capable woman who had earned her own place in the world. And so I prepared myself, mentally and emotionally, for what was to come. The confrontation with my parents would not be easy, but it would be necessary. I would not allow them to profit from my uncle's kindness. I would stand tall, not just for me, but for every person who had been abandoned by those who were supposed to love them. As I lay down that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something profound. Life could break you, but it could also give you opportunities to rebuild stronger than before. And I intended to take every single one. Uncle Jonathan had given me more than money. He had given me hope. He had given me belief in myself. And, unknowingly, he had given me the power to turn the tables on those who had tried to erase me. The fall had ended, the rise had begun. The world seemed quieter after Uncle Jonathan's passing, almost eerily so. His presence had been a constant in my life for years, the quiet force that reminded me I was never truly alone. Now, without him, the silence pressed in around me. Even in my apartment, surrounded by the remnants of the life I had rebuilt, I felt an emptiness I couldn't shake. I stared at his photograph on my desk, the familiar face, the kind eyes, the smile that had always made me feel safe. The grief hit in waves, sometimes sudden, sometimes creeping into the corners of my mind when I least expected it. At night, I would lie awake, reliving the countless conversations we had had, the advice, the encouragement, the quiet nudges that had pushed me to keep going even when the world seemed determined to crush me. But grief, I quickly learned, is not just sorrow. It can also be a catalyst for discovery. A few days after his funeral, I received an unexpected package at my apartment. It was addressed to me in Uncle Jonathan's careful, neat handwriting. Inside, there was a letter and a set of legal documents. My hands shook as I opened it, a mix of fear and anticipation twisting in my chest. I knew this was the moment my life would change once again, but I had no idea just how dramatically. The letter was simple, yet its implications were enormous. Linda, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to guide you directly. I want you to know how proud I am of the woman you've become. You have persevered through challenges that would have crushed most people. I have arranged my affairs in a way that ensures your protection and independence. The details are enclosed. Trust in yourself and act wisely. With love, Uncle Jonathan. Enclosed were the legal documents, wills, trusts, and contracts with precise instructions. Everything he had accumulated over his life, from savings accounts to investments, real estate, and intellectual property, had been secured in a way that only I could access. There were clauses that completely excluded anyone who had abandoned me, anyone who had proven through actions, or lack thereof, that they were unworthy of inheritance. And yes, that included my parents. I read and reread the documents, my heart pounding with a mix of relief, disbelief, and a growing sense of vindication. All those years of betrayal, all the nights of pain and loneliness were about to meet their reckoning. My parents, who had treated me like an inconvenience, would not see a penny. The conditions were airtight, legally binding, and utterly in my favor. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: triumph. But it was tempered by grief. My uncle was gone, and nothing could replace the love and guidance he had provided. Yet as I looked at the documents, a new resolve began to form. I would honor him by executing his plan fully, by standing tall against the people who had once tried to erase me. It didn't take long for my parents to make their move. Word traveled quickly that Uncle Jonathan had passed. Almost immediately, I began to notice messages, calls, and subtle, concerned visits from Raymond and Dorothy Cox. They acted as if they were worried about me, as if the sudden loss of my uncle had left me vulnerable. But I knew better. Their intentions were transparent. They were sniffing around his estate, assuming that they could manipulate their way into wealth that had never been earned. I remember the first time they showed up at my apartment. My father stood on the doorstep, his usual smug expression plastered across his face, while my mother trailed behind him, perfectly coiffed, perfectly put together, as if appearances could mask the years of neglect and cruelty. "Linda, darling," my mother began, her voice saccharine. "We were so shocked to hear about Jonathan. We just want to make sure you're coping." I looked at her, my eyes cold, unflinching. "I'm coping," I said, voice steady. He made sure I would be. My father's smugness faltered, replaced by something that resembled disbelief. "What do you mean?" I held up the lawyer's letter and the legal documents, letting them fall slowly onto the coffee table. "This is what he left for me. Everything is secured, and the conditions explicitly exclude anyone who has shown they don't deserve it." For a moment, the room was silent. My parents' faces twisted through a mixture of anger, shock, and humiliation. They had assumed, of course, that they would have access to my uncle's millions. They hadn't counted on the man's foresight, his unwavering loyalty to me, the one he knew deserved support. "You can't do this," my father said finally, voice trembling slightly. "We're family," I laughed, a cold, hard sound that surprised even me. "Family? Family is not a title or a DNA test. Family is loyalty, love, support, and action. You abandoned me when I needed you most. You erased me. You have no right." My mother's eyes filled with tears, though I doubted they were for me. Likely, they were for the lost opportunity, for the millions they assumed they could claim. I saw it all, every calculated smile, every cold word from my past, reflected back in their faces. Over the next several weeks, the confrontation escalated. My parents attempted legal challenges, subtle manipulation, and emotional appeals, but each time I held the documents, held the truth, and held my ground. Witnesses, lawyers, and advisors all confirmed what I already knew. Uncle Jonathan had protected me fully, anticipating their greed and ensuring that their hands would remain empty. I found a strange satisfaction in watching them struggle. Not out of malice, but from the simple justice of the universe correcting an imbalance. For so long I had been powerless, abandoned, and erased. Now I was in control. Now I could honor the memory of the man who believed in me when my own family did not. Amid all this, life continued to move forward. I was still rebuilding, still creating, still dreaming. But I did it now with the confidence of someone who had survived betrayal and emerged stronger. I had learned that life's harshest lessons often carry the most valuable truths. Trust must be earned, loyalty cannot be assumed, and the people who truly matter are those who act when the world turns its back. And yet, there was a quiet sadness beneath the triumph. I had won, yes, but at a cost. The people who should have been proud, supportive, and loving were gone from my life. Not by accident, but by choice. Their absence was a wound that would never fully heal, a reminder of how fragile the bonds of blood can be when they are not backed by genuine care. I spent many nights reflecting on Uncle Jonathan's wisdom. "Linda," he had said once years ago, "some people will never see your worth, no matter what you achieve. Don't waste your heart on those who refuse to recognize it. Build your own family, those who believe in you, those who fight for you, those who care." He was right. My uncle had given me more than financial security. He had given me clarity, perspective, and the courage to define my own sense of family. I realized that family is not the people who share your blood, but the people who share your values, your loyalty, and your heart. As the days passed, and my parents' attempts to claim what they had never earned continued to fail, I felt a sense of liberation I had never known. The anger, the fear, and the betrayal transformed into something powerful: purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I was no longer defined by the people who had tried to erase me. I was defined by my own actions, my own choices, and my own heart. And somewhere in the quiet moments, between grief and triumph, I could almost hear Uncle Jonathan's voice, guiding me still. Stand tall, protect what is yours, honor yourself. I would honor him. The day finally arrived when everything would come to a head. Months of quiet preparation, careful planning, and managing the fallout from my uncle's estate had led to this moment. I was ready, not just financially, but emotionally. For years, I had been abandoned, dismissed, and erased by the very people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Now, the tables had turned. It started with a formal meeting arranged by Uncle Jonathan's lawyer. My parents had been invited under the pretense of discussing the estate. They assumed, of course, that their charm, manipulations, and familial ties would give them access to what they considered their due. But what they didn't know was that every step had been anticipated, every move accounted for, and every claim they might make legally blocked by my uncle's meticulous planning. When they arrived at the law firm's sleek downtown office, I was already there, seated at the table, calm and composed. My father, Raymond Cox, stormed in first, wearing his usual confident expression that quickly faltered when he saw me. My mother, Dorothy, glided in behind him, her designer heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, a calculated smile plastered on her face. I knew that smile. It was the same one she had worn when she dismissed me at 25, when I had begged for help and she had looked at me with utter indifference. "Linda," my mother began, her voice artificially warm, "we just want to understand what's happening. We want to make sure everything is handled properly." I didn't rise. I didn't speak immediately. Instead, I let my gaze linger on them, taking in the arrogance, the entitlement, and the disbelief on their faces. Then I reached for the folder in front of me and slid the first document toward them, the lawyer's letter and Uncle Jonathan's instructions. "This is what your son, or rather your niece, is entitled to," I said evenly, my voice steady. "Everything in my uncle's estate has been secured with conditions that exclude anyone who abandoned me, refused to support me, or attempted to manipulate the outcome for personal gain. That includes both of you." My father's face turned red, a mixture of fury and shock. "You can't do this. We're family." I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing. "Family is what you do, not what you are born into. You abandoned me when I needed you most. You erased me. You have no claim, no right, and no say." My mother gasped, covering her mouth with a trembling hand. This isn't fair. Jonathan would have never wanted this. You can't." I interrupted her, voice rising slightly but controlled. "He did want this. He anticipated your greed. He protected me, and by extension, he protected the truth. You cannot manipulate or bully your way into what was never yours. Every attempt you make will fail." Over the next hour, the lawyer meticulously walked them through the details, explaining how the trust, the estate, and the legal arrangements were structured. Every loophole they had assumed existed was closed. Every attempt to challenge the estate would be met with legal and financial barriers. And the conditions, they were precise, leaving no room for negotiation. As the discussion went on, I watched my parents' expressions shift from anger to disbelief to desperation. I could almost hear their internal monologues, the calculations they were making in their minds, the plans they were formulating, all crumbling under the weight of the documents before them. "You can't just cut us out," my father shouted, his voice echoing through the room. "We raised you. We're your parents. I shook my head slowly, each word deliberate, each syllable a hammer against the false foundations of their entitlement. You raised a version of me that suited your image. You loved the trophy, not the person. And when I failed, when I needed you most, you were gone. You erased me. That is why you have nothing. And that is why you will never have anything from him, from me, or from this legacy. My mother's tears fell freely now, but they weren't for me. I could see the fear in her eyes, the realization that all the years of manipulation, the social climbing, and the self-serving love had led them here, empty-handed and exposed. The lawyer guided the conversation, reading out the specific clauses that made my parents ineligible for any inheritance. The room was silent except for the crisp sound of pages turning, punctuated by my parents' occasional sputtering protests. Each clause, each sentence, reaffirmed what I had known all along. Justice was finally on my side. After what felt like hours, my father slumped into the chair, exhausted and defeated. His face, once so sure and commanding, was now etched with humiliation. My mother clutched her designer handbag, trembling, her polished facade completely shattered. They had been outmaneuvered not by me, but by the man they had ignored, the one who had truly loved me. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. The confrontation was over. Their greed, their entitlement, and their betrayal had been exposed for all to see. I hadn't just won financially, I had reclaimed my dignity, my voice, and my power. After they left the office, I sat quietly, reflecting on what had just happened. The satisfaction was real, yes, but it was tempered by the knowledge that no amount of money or justice could erase the scars of betrayal. Yet the weight of their absence no longer pressed on me as it once had. I had faced them, spoken my truth, and emerged intact. That was victory enough. Later that evening, as I walked through my apartment, I thought of Uncle Jonathan. I imagined him smiling, quietly proud. "You did it, Linda," I whispered aloud. "You stood tall. You honored the truth. You honored us." I realized then that the confrontation wasn't just about money, it was about reclaiming my life, proving that integrity, resilience, and loyalty mattered more than birthright. It was about showing the world, and myself, that I was not defined by the cruelty or greed of others, but by the strength I had discovered within myself. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Free from fear, free from the weight of betrayal, free from the false expectations of people who had never truly cared. I had justice, I had closure, and most importantly, I had the knowledge that I had built something no one could ever take from me. My self-respect, my dignity, and the life I had fought so hard to reclaim. The confrontation had ended, but my journey wasn't over. I still had dreams to chase, businesses to build, and a life to live on my own terms. But now, I faced the future with a certainty I had never known. A certainty that no betrayal, no setback, and no greed could ever erase the woman I had become. And as I closed the folder, the lawyer nodding at me with quiet admiration, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I would never allow anyone to erase me again. The confrontation with my parents left echoes that lingered long after the office door closed behind them. For the first time, I walked through my apartment without the oppressive weight of fear or anticipation pressing down on me. No more frantic phone calls, no more worrying about manipulation or betrayal. The chapter of my life dominated by abandonment, erasure, and family greed had finally come to a close. Yet freedom is a strange thing. It isn't loud or dramatic. It is quiet, subtle, and at first almost imperceptible. I felt it in the small things, the peace of waking up without dread, the ability to make decisions without second-guessing who would approve, the joy of knowing that my uncle's foresight had shielded me from the people who had once tried to destroy me. I was free in a way I had never imagined. The first morning after the confrontation, I sat at my small kitchen table with a cup of coffee, sunlight spilling across my notes and documents. I reflected on everything that had brought me to this point: the betrayal by my parents, the bankruptcy, the eviction notices, the long nights filled with uncertainty and fear. And most importantly, I thought about Uncle Jonathan, the man who had believed in me when no one else did, whose kindness had become the foundation for the life I now had. Tears came, but not for sorrow. They were tears of gratitude, release, and recognition. I allowed myself to feel everything fully, for the first time in years. Grief, relief, anger, and joy, intertwined in a complex tapestry that reminded me that surviving wasn't just about enduring, it was about living, truly living. In the days that followed, I began to make choices that reflected this newfound freedom. I started mentoring young entrepreneurs, offering guidance to those who, like me, had faced setbacks that seemed insurmountable. I shared lessons I had learned about resilience, trust, and defining family through loyalty and action, not blood or expectation. Watching others grow, succeed, and regain their confidence reminded me of the power of support and encouragement, the very gifts my uncle had given me. I also allowed myself to dream again. I relaunched a tech venture, smaller at first but built on lessons learned from failure and resilience. I approached investors not just with ideas, but with the story of someone who had fought, lost, and rebuilt, a story that resonated more deeply than any business plan could alone. Slowly, methodically, my work gained traction, and I realized that the fear that had once paralyzed me was gone. I was no longer running from failure or betrayal. I was running toward purpose. Socially, I distanced myself from those who had proven themselves unreliable or toxic. It was hard at first, especially letting go of the illusion that family was defined by blood. But the emptiness left by their absence was gradually replaced with relationships that mattered: friends who celebrated my victories, colleagues who respected my integrity, and mentees who reminded me daily why perseverance and kindness mattered. I found myself thinking about my parents less and less, not out of bitterness, but because they had become irrelevant. The people who matter, the ones who shaped me, protected me, and encouraged me, were the ones I chose to keep close. My uncle had been one of them. Angela had been another. And now, I was learning to be that person for others, strong, dependable, and unwavering in the face of adversity. Yet freedom also brought clarity. I could finally see the patterns of my life and understand that each painful moment had taught me something invaluable. The abandonment by my parents taught me self-reliance and discernment. The bankruptcy taught me humility and financial discipline. The kindness of my uncle taught me the power of unwavering support. Each piece, even the painful ones, had shaped me into someone stronger than I ever imagined I could be. One evening, months after the confrontation, I sat on my balcony, the city lights of Irvine twinkling below. I reflected on the journey from a desperate 25-year-old drowning in debt and betrayal to a 33-year-old woman who had reclaimed her life and dignity. The skyline, vast and limitless, mirrored the sense of possibility that now stretched before me. I whispered into the night, almost as if speaking to my uncle's memory. "I've done it. I've honored your faith, your guidance, and your love. I am who I am because of you." And then I allowed myself something I had denied for years: to forgive, not to forget, not to excuse, but to release the hold that past anger had on my heart. My parents had chosen their path, I had chosen mine. And that choice, that simple but profound act of taking control of my life, was the most powerful redemption of all. With that clarity came purpose. I began writing about my journey, sharing my experiences with others who had faced betrayal, financial ruin, or family rejection. I wanted to show them that survival was possible, that rebuilding was achievable, and that family could be redefined in ways that offered love, support, and genuine connection. Every story I shared, every message of encouragement I sent, was a tribute to the uncle who had saved me and the inner strength I had discovered along the way. Love, I realized, was not about obligation or expectation. It was about action, about showing up for those who matter when the world turns its back. And justice, I learned, was not about revenge. It was about ensuring that fairness, integrity, and truth prevailed, even when the odds seemed stacked against you. I became my own advocate, protector, and champion. I learned to celebrate victories, both small and large, with gratitude and humility. I learned that the past, no matter how painful, was not a chain, but a teacher. And I realized, most importantly, that I was no longer defined by anyone else's failures or cruelty. I was defined by my own courage, resilience, and choices. As I closed my laptop that night, finishing an article for a young entrepreneurs forum, I felt a quiet sense of completion. The battle had been fought, the confrontation won, and the lessons learned. My journey was not over. It would never truly be over. But I had reached a place of peace, strength, and self-determination that no one could take from me. The shadow of loss remained, yes, but it no longer consumed me. It was a reminder of what I had endured, what I had learned, and how far I had come. I was free to live, to dream, and to love on my own terms. And in that freedom, I finally understood what redemption truly meant. Not to erase the past, but to rise above it, stronger, wiser, and unafraid. I had survived betrayal, reclaimed my life, and in doing so, had discovered a truth more valuable than any fortune or inheritance: my own strength, my own worth, and my own unshakable freedom. I was no longer just Linda Wells, the daughter abandoned. I was Linda Wells, the survivor, the champion, the woman who refused to be erased. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly, utterly whole.